From the CyberHub bunker and studio, you're tuning in to the CyberHub Podcast. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Good morning, security gang. Welcome to another episode of the CyberHub Podcast, Tuesday, January 7th, 2025. Welcome to the live show this morning. A lot to talk about on this morning's program, so we're going to get right into it here in just a moment. So, first of all, obviously, beginning of the year, brand new year, a lot happening yesterday. Obviously, yesterday, the election was officially certified. So in just 13 short days, President Donald J. Trump will take over the White House. And I do expect some really significant changes within the next 12 months around cybersecurity. I do feel like 2025 is the year we transform cybersecurity a little bit on the national level, especially around the discussions and government responsibility. So there's more on that likely on Friday. So just kind of keep that in mind. That's forthcoming. Now, without further ado, join me for a traditional CyberHub Podcast tradition every single morning, a double espresso. That's what I've got this morning. Lavazza double espresso, coffee cup. Cheers, y'all. If you're tuning in live on YouTube, X, Facebook, LinkedIn, good morning. Let me know what you're drinking. And let's go ahead and get started with more Salt Typhoon victims coming forward. The list now exceeds just shy of a dozen companies that were impacted by the Chinese state APT Salt Typhoon. Verizon, AT&T, and Lumen both confirmed that they were victims. Now we're getting more companies. Over the weekend, the Wall Street Journal reported that Charter Communication, Consolidated Communication, and Windstream were all also victims of Salt Typhoon. And Neuberger, the White House Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technology, said back on December 27th that they breached 9 telecoms. I think that number is now probably going to reach around 11 or 12 by the time it's all said and done. And the reason this is taking time is there's significant challenges with essentially identifying and evicting the activities and the type of malware and backdoors that Salt Typhoon implemented in these networks. And the more they dig into it, the more complex it's getting. Someone very close to the Salt Typhoon breach was actually telling me yesterday that they've seen multiple different streams of activity and not just one happening within different telecom companies. Essentially, they were kind of trying different things as it went along, and that's again not surprising. So this kind of goes back to what U.S. Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon announcing a new bill to secure the infrastructure of American telecom, which outgoing FCC Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel said the agency would act urgently to do that. However, it's under her watch that this happened. It's also under her watch, and then she's outgoing. Obviously, Brandon Carr's taken over the FCC here once the new administration is sworn in. In 1994, Congress passed a bill, and Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon's bill is essentially doubling down on a bill from 1994. That was the Telecom Security Bill. Telecom Security Bill required telecoms to actually do more around securing telecom communications in the country. That's 1994, 30 years old. That bill was never enforced by the FCC. So while Jessica Rosenworcel isn't solely responsible, the FCC as an overseeing body is extensively responsible for this attack. Not necessarily the telecoms. While they hold responsibility, the FCC's lack of enforcing a law that Congress passed, the U.S. taxpayers endorsed, tells you everything you need to know about the broken system that exists around cybersecurity regulation in the federal government. The fact is, if you're taking a look right there at the top right-hand corner of your screen, there's a word, CISA, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, which the Trump administration brought to life back in 2018. If that federal body is allowed to actually exercise its duties and strip all other federal agency of any cybersecurity requirements, we might get a handle around cybersecurity. That's not the case. And the fact is that the cost of cyber attacks, the cost of recovering from breaches is the highest because we have to report it to so many different agencies and because the legal cost around it is extensive. We would invest a whole lot more in infosec and in cybersecurity if we didn't have to do so much with legal. But the fact is, an average day of a CISO is more around compliance, legal, and networking within the organization than actually practicing the trade of infosec. And that's the honest to God truth. And what this breach tells us is just that. China, for their end, just so you know, so the CCP and the Chinese Communist Party are now kind of slamming a decision that we talked about yesterday on the show, where OFAC and Treasury decided to put sanctions on the ironic name of a cybersecurity company based out of Beijing called Integrity Technology Group, which is associated with multiple different Chinese APTs, including Salt Typhoon from 2021 data breaches. The Chinese propaganda arm says for some time now, the U.S. side has been playing up so-called Chinese cyber attacks and even initiated illegal unilateral sanctions against China. China firmly opposes this and will take necessary measures to safeguard its legitimate rights and interests. The reason China's freaking out about this, by the way, and they're going on the offensive, because they typically won't do it. They won't admit it because in China, they don't want to show, they don't like to show China standing in the world from dropping. Big regimes, dictators like Xi Jinping in China, they don't like to show locally that their stature in the world is dropping, right? When your stature as a leader drops, then you're Justin Trudeau out of a job, as one would argue, is what we saw yesterday. So Xi Jinping and the CCP here fighting because Integrity Technology Group is a large cybersecurity company in China. The sanctions not only impact its business in the US, but also in Europe and allied Asian countries with the US, who will now have to reconsider their relationship with the so-called Integrity Technology Group. And that's why China's freaking out, because that's a direct hit on what China is trying to do in Southeast Asia in terms of cyber and competing with US and Western cybersecurity businesses. So that's why they're freaking out. But the news doesn't get any easier there. So Security Week wrote about this back in 2020. We talked about this a little bit back in the show back then. This is a project that really started at Temple University, tracking the amount of ransomware attacks on critical infrastructure organizations in the US. Back in 2020, it covered more than 680 ransomware attacks targeting critical infrastructure. By February of 2022, that number entries exceeded 1,100. It's now broken to 2,000. So as they started tracking it, that's around 500 cyber attacks a year since 2020. We're just started 2025, so it's 4 years. So just, around 500 cyber attacks a year. The critical infrastructure ransomware attacks database currently covers more than 2,000 attacks documented since at least 2013. It includes nearly 300 entries for incidents that came to light just in 2024 alone. It contains information like name of victim, date of incident, country or U.S. state, targeted critical infrastructure sector, name of the attacking threat group, duration of the incident, the MITRE ATT&CK mapping, and if known, the amount of money and the ransom paid to the victim. The data shows that the three most targeted critical infrastructure sectors or subsectors from 2 years ago remain popular today. That's government facilities, healthcare and public health, and education facilities. The least targeted continue to be nuclear reactors, materials and waste, defense industrial base, chemical, water, and wastewater. While we're seeing an increase in water and wastewater, it's still not even in the top two because simply water doesn't pay. They don't have the budget for cyber and they don't have the budget to pay. Most of them are underinsured to begin with. More than 5 million USD went up from a frequency count of 49 to 70. The ransom of 1 million USD went up from 45 to 71, showing you just the amount of ransom, and the ask has gone up. And again, critical infrastructure remains significant. Good morning, our friend Ernesto over on YouTube. Happy Tuesday. And yes, coffee, more and more coffee. But the challenge for critical infrastructure, specifically in the energy sector, when you think of oil and gas or you think of power, whether it be generation or transmission, is patching vulnerabilities. And the reason for it is because you can't really patch unless you're in a scheduled outage. Scheduled outages come and go based on the season, the facility, its urgency, and so forth, and the company running that facility. And so Moxa devices are used in environments like industrial automation and control systems for transportation, utilities, energy, and telecom sectors. The vendor on Friday issued two urgent warnings for two significant vulnerabilities. One is CVE 2024-90138, a hard-coded credential that enables authenticated users to escalate privileges to root. And CVE 2024-90140, that's a 9.3 critical severity score. That's an OS command injection flaw caused by exploiting improper input restrictions, leading to arbitrary code execution. And when you're in energy and you're in ICS, when you see a notice like this, right? Because vulnerabilities is the number one thing you need to address, like any cybersecurity practitioner would. However, when you see this, I immediately, being in the energy sector, go to how do we mitigate? So I don't know if I can patch or not, depending on what system it sits on, and what systems the devices are on, and whether or not they're exposed to the internet, and whether or not they're part of my best cyber systems and best cyber assets and so forth. If they are, then we're mitigating them, meaning we could shut down ports, we could add additional protections, etc. If it's isolated and off network, then it's essentially scheduled to get patched up during the next outage. So whenever we take the plant offline for maintenance, we go in and we do these updates as well. And that's the challenge. Whenever you see an industrial control system talk about patching now in energy, it's not as easy as it may seem. So that's something to keep in mind there. CISO for there, and they're saying that the breach that happened over last week for Treasury, that was the root cause of it, was the Beyond Trust remote support SaaS API key 0 day, was only limited to Treasury, according to a letter to Congress. At this time, there's no indication, according to CISA, that any other federal agencies were impacted by the incident. Again, this kind of goes to opportunity. The Chinese will scan, obviously, using a tool like Shodan, which is used by good guys and bad guys alike. And so if you're not using Shodan, you definitely want to be able to kind of use Shodan in your threat intel in your threat hunting, in order to see what's out there, what's exposed, what do attackers see within your environment, so you know how to deal with it as well. Right now, this breach appears to be just limited to Treasury, unless otherwise noted. We'll wipe that off and say, thank goodness. An unknown attacker is wielding an updated version of a backdoor malware that was previously deployed against high-profile Southeast Asian organizations in targeted attack. This time, they're using it against ISPs and governmental entities in the Middle East. Researchers at Kaspersky detected a new variant of the Eager-B backdoor, outfitted with new components and attacks that demonstrate a significant evolution of the malware framework. Eagle-B is primarily designed to operate in memory to enhance its stealth capabilities and help it evade detection by traditional EDR. According to Kaspersky, it's also unique in that it obscures its command shell activities by injecting malicious code into legitimate processes that are executed within the context of the explorer.exe or the targeted user session. And again, this kind of goes into how your security operations needs to understand the business processes and then the computer and network processes that exist. And while you hear a lot of people say that you don't need technical capabilities to get into cybersecurity, that may be partially true when it comes on the GRC side of the house. But when you're looking at security engineering, security architecture, and then security operations, that's not the case at all. If you want to wear any one of those hats, those technical and networking background and capabilities are critical, because once you identify how something is supposed to behave and then it's not behaving correctly, that doesn't come from an EDR. That comes from knowledge of how a system operates. And the best people in our industry understand that. That's why that's so critical. So according to the latest version of Eager-B that was being used in the Middle East attacks, it features new advanced features, including a novel service injector designed to inject backdoor into a running service, a slew of previously undocumented plugins that can be deployed after the backdoor is installed. So who are behind it? It looks like it's Chinese Iron Tiger, aka Emissary Panda, and a Chinese APT that's deploying this backdoor. Again, something to keep in mind there. Another patch now from MediaTek, HP Enterprise, and Dell releasing advisories yesterday informing customers about potentially serious vulnerabilities found and patched in their products. The Taiwanese semiconductor company MediaTek announced patches for over a dozen vulnerabilities, including a critical severity flaw in their modem component for tens of chipsets that could lead to remote code execution. That's CVE 2024-20154. It's described as an out-of-bounds write that could be exploited when a device is connected to a rogue base station. MediaTek's advisory also details 7 high-severity bugs that could lead to local escalation of privilege. Dell announced patches for a high-severity deficit in its updated package framework, tracked as CVE 2025-2239-5, and described as a local escalation of privilege issue that could enable the execution of arbitrary scripts, leading to a denial of service condition. The version 22.01.02 resolves that vulnerability. HP announced patches for multiple flaws in third-party components used in its SAN switches running Brocade Fabric OS, including high and medium severity issues there as well. So you want to make sure you get those patched up. And finally, T-Mobile can't seem to get away from additional investigations and lawsuits. Now, Bob Ferguson, the Washington State AG, filed a lawsuit against T-Mobile over their 2021 data breach. On Monday, the lawsuit alleges a lack of proper security controls over customer personal data, asserting the carrier knew about certain vulnerabilities and failed to address them. Again, the crackdown on telecom is coming, y'all. It's coming, and it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be pretty at all. The laws were in the books. They didn't follow them. The FCC failed to enforce them. Brandon Carr at the FCC is going to have a tall order to help fix this, because that's going to be the top priority of the FCC. My hope and prayer is that whoever Kristi Noem, DHS Secretary, appoints to replace Jen Easterly at CISA is up to the task of partnering with other federal agency based on the current layout to help consolidate cybersecurity oversight. Really do that. All right, coffee cup cheers for some of our friends over on YouTube. Thank you all for tuning in. Yeah, shout out to the early risers. I know we have people from California that tune in. It's only 6 a.m. in Cali, and also people overseas. We got about 30 different countries that view this live feed between all the platforms. So thank you all for taking time to be part of it. Please make sure to subscribe, follow, share, comment, like. If you have any questions, you can always shoot them in. We try to get to those during the show as well. Thank you all for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day, and most importantly, y'all, stay cyber safe.
We love feedback, so make sure to connect with us on social media and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform.